40. Look at that, a new digit. Genesis 40. I am going to speed read the entire chapter, okay? So turn there and follow along. I'm going to read it as quickly as I can. So Genesis 40, we're going to read the chapter. Then it came about after these things, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard in the jail, the same place where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them. And they were in confinement for some time. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream in the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. And he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please." So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and as it was budding, its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand." Then Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to your former custom when you were his cupbearer. Only keep me in mind when it goes well with you, and please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. For I was, in fact, kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing that they should have put me into the dungeon." When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, "I also saw in my dream, and behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Then Joseph answered and said, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you." Thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. I've joked about this before. I've joked about it a number of times. My poor wife has to put up with my jokes, but it's really true. My wife could kill me so easily if she wanted to. It would be so easy for her to do it. I don't ask any questions. If she gives me a pill, I put it in my mouth and I swallow it. That's what I do. Like, I just, if I'm really sick or something, and she'll come up, "Here, take these." In fact, a little while ago, she walked up and said, "Here, take these." And I said, "What are they?" She said, "Just swallow them." Okay. I swallow them. Just whatever's given to me. You know why? Because I trust her. Right? Like, they're not arsenic pills or anything like that. They're either good for me or they don't do anything for me, but they're not harmful to me. So whatever, I'll swallow them. I take them. You better trust the person that feeds you, right? And that's the most obvious thing in the story. Both of these individuals that dreamed dreams were in a similar position with Pharaoh. The butler, right, the cupbearer, was the one who would taste test. He was the canary in the coal mine, right? He was the canary in the coal mine. He would take the cup and he would drink anything that Pharaoh was about to drink. And if he didn't die, then Pharaoh was safe to drink it, right? And so the butler would taste anything. By the way, Nehemiah was this same thing in the Babylonian court. Nehemiah was a cupbearer. He was the king's taste tester to make sure that the king wasn't being slipped something that would kill him. All right? So there's the butler or the cupbearer. The baker was also in the same position because he was cooking foods and serving them to Pharaoh. How many of you remember, what was the name of those Christian cartoons a while back? No, it wasn't Veggie Tales. If I quote the line I want to quote my kids, it was what was it? Story Keepers with the secret poison torture pastries. We're gonna kill Nero. We got to escape from the prison. So these are our secret poison torture pastries, and you eat them, and they put on a big show, and it distracts everybody, and they make their way out of the prison, and they escape. Right? Well, because you can bake poison into something if you want to, right? And so they're in the same position. They both have a responsibility to make sure that Pharaoh isn't taking something into him that could kill him. Now, obviously in the story, Pharaoh is offended with both of these people. Whatever they've done is unclear, but they've done something to upset him. He throws them in prison. They have dreams. Joseph interprets the dreams, and the butler gets restored to his position. The baker, things don't go so well for the baker, right? The cupbearer gets restored, the baker is executed. And both men experience exactly what Joseph prophesies they're going to experience based upon their dreams. Now, I want to take a few minutes and let me just apologize again for the first time in several years. I don't have a PowerPoint. 100% my fault. I changed my schedule this week, some things, and I changed my routine, and I am a creature of habit, and I failed you all, so I'm sorry. Once I changed my schedule, it was like, okay, this task is completed, and in my head it was all done, and it wasn't all done. I didn't make a PowerPoint, so I'm sorry. But I want to look at three lessons that we can take from this story. I'm sure there are others, but I want to look at three lessons we can take from this story. I want to start with how to speak. How to speak. Joseph delivers good news to the butler, but he delivers some pretty bad news to the baker, right? To the butler, it's 3 days. Pharaoh's going to lift you up, and you're going to be restored to your position. But to the baker, he says, 3 days from now, Pharaoh's going to lift you up too, and he's going to take off your head. And this is not going to go well for you. You're going to be done. He will lift up your head from you and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Wow. That's some pretty hard words to say to somebody. Right? That's what's coming to you in 3 days. How many of you have ever wrestled with the thought that you might have to say something hard to someone? Not that you're going to have your head lifted off you in 3 days, right? But something that was going to be hard, right? Something you knew was going to be difficult. The question of what to say and how to say it, especially in a day of very, very heated rhetoric, is challenging. It just feels like there is there is so much polarization and so many extremes. Some people can't say anything because they've got to be so polite and so politically correct. Some people seem to be going to the opposite. Like, I'm having none of this, and I'm going to tell you exactly what I want to tell you, and exactly what I think. And it's like, man, can we find a reasonable way to talk to one another, right? Can we find just a reasonable way to do this? So as I was considering this story and thinking about the news that Joseph had to deliver to these men, as I was thinking about it, I'm looking at the story and thinking to myself, Lord, what are the things that we can take from this story that would speak to us about how to have these conversations, about how to talk to people in ways that are especially when the conversation is going to be difficult. And although this isn't part of the story, let me just add this one in as a starting point. Not everything needs to be said. Let's just start there. Not everything needs to be said. Okay? Like, that's the first thing to do. Lord, does this need to be said? Right? Does this really need to be said? Because we've got a world of a lot of hot takes and a lot of yeah. Lori said blah blah blah. I'm sitting here thinking, I can't get the lyrics out of my head. Everybody's talking, nothing's getting said. Like, that's the way it is, right? Everybody's talking. I'm not sure anybody hears anything anybody says, but everybody's talking, right? Not everything needs to be said. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 19 tells us that in the abundance of words there wanteth not sin. In the abundance of words there's no lack of sin. Say that again. In the abundance of words there's no lack of sin. Okay? Now, I mean, that's a truism. That's one of those things that right, unless you've prepared carefully and chosen your words carefully. I've used this before, but the friend of ours that lets us stay in their house in Maine, when I was coming here to Dillsburg at 29 years old, before I left, he looked at me and he said, "Hey, would you mind if I gave you a word of advice?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Stick to your notes. You preachers get yourselves into so much trouble when you get away from your notes." I said, "Okay, I can remember that. I can remember that. That's got a point to it, right? Make sure that you thought it through before you say it, right? Not everything needs to be said. Please hear this. Free speech is important, but so is temperance. There's not a whole... Free speech is written into the Constitution. Temperance isn't necessary. I mean, I don't know the Constitution super well, but I'm not sure there's not an amendment on temperance, is there? Right? So it's not, we as Christians, we understand that we have freedoms and that free speech is important societally, but so is temperance. I've said it often, but I less often, sometimes I do regret it, but I less often regret what I do not say than I regret the things I do say. Less often. I have a number of things that I wish I had said. But less often. I more often regret the things I say. Right? So start with, not everything needs to be said. And just ask yourself, does this really need to be said? All right. Now we go straight to Joseph's example. Let's go through a list of things that we see in the story that can help us understand how to speak and how not to speak. First of all, in verse 4, we see, although it's undefined, the amount of time is undefined, we see that Joseph had been connected to these two people for an extended amount of time. Verse 4, the captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them. and they were in confinement for some time. For some time. In other words, these were people, I mean, it wasn't a great life, but they were sharing life together, right? It was up close and personal. They were all imprisoned together. They were all in jail together. Joseph was connected to them for some time. I listen, not to get on a soapbox, but I feel like the ability to communicate online has led people, has given people a sense of freedom to say things and to say things in ways that they would never talk to complete strangers in the grocery store face to face. Right? If it was face to face, it'd be very different. But there's something about the covering and the anonymity of a screen that well, I don't care who they are. I don't care who I offend. The I don't care comes out pretty strongly, it seems, in those circumstances. Joseph was connected to these people, and he wasn't connected via the internet. He was connected to them personally, right? He knew these men. They knew him. And it should be obvious to us that there should be conversations that we should be able to have if we have gotten connected to people. Okay, so this is going to be the second one. It's another advertisement for these life groups. Like, get connected to some other people. Get connected. We can have some challenging conversations. We can have some deeper conversations. That's part of it. But we need to be connected with each other to have the capital to be able to do that. The second one is verse 6. In verse 6, when Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. Behold, they were dejected. In other words, Joseph knew them well enough to recognize their need. He knew them well enough to see it on their faces. He could tell there was something wrong with them. Now, maybe they were just like really, really big mopers, and they made it really obvious that they were in a bad way that morning. I don't know. Maybe they were big mopers. Maybe that's what got them in trouble with Pharaoh. I don't know. But the point is that Joseph could see it on their face. Joseph could see it on their face. The importance of paying attention to the people around you. The importance of knowing people well enough to be able to see it. The importance of being able to read the room. The importance of being able to notice on someone's face what's going on, right? You know, one of the things that my wife and I have talked about a couple of times recently is that evidently we have very different ways of expressing ourselves through physical cues. When I see a certain look on her face, and to me it can only mean one thing. But to her it means something completely different. And the importance of stopping and saying, yeah, I can see something's going on. Hey, what's the matter? What's the matter? Right? Joseph doesn't jump in and assume. Joseph just looks at them. He could see that they're dejected. He can recognize something's wrong with them. And so he proceeds to ask them the question. He knows them well enough to recognize their need. Let me just stay here for one more minute. I've said this a lot, but, one of the things that I find myself in conversation with people a lot is just people who are so desperately hurting and just want to be heard. And they live with the pain of feeling like, why is it that people that I love don't listen? Why is it that I'm not heard? Taking time to recognize there's something going on inside that person. I can see it. I can see it. Joseph knows them well enough to recognize their need. And then, verse 7 is the next step. He asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, "Why are your faces so sad today?" Now, again, it must have been obvious because Joseph simply attributes, he doesn't ask them, "Are you sad?" He just says, "Why are you so sad today?" But the point is that he recognized it. And please notice this. Joseph is motivated by the concern that he has in his heart for what he can see on their faces. It affects him. It affects him. I'm not sure I have ever learned to do this well. I've been threatening, and I have actually asked this question to professionals in the past. Like, how do you do what you do and without carrying a burden around on your heart all day long that ruins every day of your life? How do you do that? How do you care enough to care and not care enough to live? It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge. Well, from this verse, at least, what we get is that Joseph cared enough to care, right? In his heart, he sees and he's motivated by concern for them. You're sad. You're sad. What's the matter? You know, the world could just use a few more people that are paying attention to people around them, see need when it should be obvious, and care enough to inquire. Hey, how you doing? You okay? Looks like there's something going on. Matthew chapter 12, verse 34 tells us that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. In this verse, we can apply it two ways. Joseph saw two men that had something going on inside of them, and he knew that there was something going on inside of them, and he gave them the opportunity to let it out. Why are you so sad today? You want to talk? Right? But secondly, not only does he give them the opportunity to talk out of the abundance of his heart, but he talks out of the abundance of his own. I see that you're sad today. Are you okay? What's going on? In other words, because he cares in his heart, the question comes out of his mouth. And he gives them the opportunity to unburden their hearts out of the abundance of their heart to share. And I keep saying this over and over again, but the world is full of people. They're like Mount Vesuvius. They can explode at any moment because they've got bottled up inside of them like a volcano. So much stuff that they haven't shared with anybody that if you give them half a chance, they'll erupt. And they almost don't care who it is. It could just as easily be a stranger because they've got so much stuff on the inside. Like, does anybody care? Will anybody listen? Can I talk to someone? Can I get this out of my system a little bit? Right? Joseph is just in that position to just kind of take the pin and just prick the balloon and just say, hey, just with a little question. Psh, you got something to say? He has a heart of compassion for him. Verse 8, then they said to him, we have had a dream and there is no one to interpret it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell it to me, please. My brothers and sisters, you all know the verse. Whether you can quote the whole thing or not, everyone, it's likely that 95% of you, whether you know the reference or not, know this in some form. Always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is in you. You have that. You have the gospel. You have the hope of salvation. You have living within your heart the songs that we sang this morning, that He is exalted, the King is exalted on high, that He came to defeat the powers of darkness, that we have a Savior who is worthy of our praise. Joseph points them toward God as the source of their hope and as the one who can meet their need. We've had dreams and there's no one to interpret it. Joseph doesn't puff out his chest. Joseph takes no credit for it. Joseph points them to God. There's a God who can interpret your dream. There's a God. And he brings them before God. He brings God into the equation for them, on their behalf. We just need people in our lives that will bring God into the equation in our conversations. That will bring God into the conversation. Encourage us. Yeah, I do have hope. Yes. Listen, I don't think I have a whole lot myself, but I know there's a God. He has an answer for you. Joseph brings God to them. Verses 9 through 11 and then verses 16 and 17, very importantly, once he's asked the question, Joseph stops to listen. Why are you so sad? We've dreamed a dream we don't have anyone to interpret. Do not interpretations belong to God? And then he lets him talk. Then he listens. The power of listening. You know, James 1:19 tells us to be quick to hear, slow to speak. How many of you are really skilled at that? How many of you find yourself to be much quicker to speak than you are to hear? Right? Half the time, you know what I've discovered about conversations when they're going south is that half the time we are saying so much that's not related to the thing the other person said because we heard it a certain way and we failed to clarify, and we're answering them based upon what we think about it, not what they were actually saying. Just take time to listen, right? Just make sure we know what we're talking about before we start talking. Swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Joseph listened before he spoke. And then in verses 18 and 19, Joseph spoke a hard truth when it was necessary. Let me read it to you again. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you, and will hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh off you. Now, I really thank God that I've never had to say anything like that to anybody. That's not on my list of things that I want to say to anybody. Here's another scripture that all of us know well. You know, when there are those times that really difficult things must be said, Colossians 4, verse 6, let your speech be always with grace. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned, as it were, with salt, so that you may know how you should respond to each person. Let your speech always be with grace. If you don't hear, listen, if you don't hear one other thing that was said this morning, if we spent the rest of our lives only saying words that were marked by grace, it would change your whole existence. It would change your whole existence. When you have to say hard things, it's amazing how much easier it is to receive hard things when the hard things are spoken with grace. When they're spoken with grace. Now, listen, when you're reading the Bible, just reading it out loud has a certain amount of interpretation to it. Because I don't know how Joseph spoke those words. Right? If he really couldn't stand the baker, it would be something like, here's the interpretation. 3 days from now, Pharaoh's going to lift your head up from you and hang you on a tree, pal. Right? Or he might have said, sorry to have to tell you this. Please get yourself ready. Let me tell you about my God, because 3 days from now, Pharaoh's going to lift your head up from you. It's bad news. It's bad news. You've got 3 days left. Get ready. I don't know, right? Listen, the whole series of The Chosen is full of this. Very deliberately. I mean, the backstories are completely made up. I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just making the observation. I've said this before. I would be terrified to be an actor that was asked to portray Jesus. I would be terrified. Because everything about what I'm saying and doing is and I would be going, is this what Jesus intended to communicate? Is this the way? My point is simply this, that maybe all of this speaks to us, maybe the idea of speaking with grace just inserts the idea of a measure of caution about what we say and how we say it. Think twice. You've heard the old carpenter's adage, right? Measure twice, cut once. Right? Measure twice, cut once. Think twice, speak once. Right? Like, think it through before you speak. I don't always do it well. Anyway, these are some of the things that we can see from the story of Joseph. The second thing, and we're going to get done in good time this morning. I'm pretty excited. The second thing is, like, such good time that I'm checking my watch to make sure that clock is correct. The second thing is how to wait. So the first one was how to speak. The second one is how to wait. How to wait. Listen, we didn't read this, but at the end of the story, Genesis 41 verse 1 starts like this. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he was standing by the Nile. In other words, that's how long Joseph was forgotten by the cupbearer. It was 2 full years. I can't wait in line for 2 full minutes. Right? We don't wait well. Genesis 41 verse 1 tells us it was 2 full years before he was called to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Waiting is hard for us. Listen, we all recognize how much we love the Psalms because of how they speak to us, but I took the time to count them. There are at least 18 times in which the psalmist asked the question directly, how long? How long? At least 18. I say at least 18 because there's one other that's not a question. It's kind of a statement. But it's the same idea. How long? Sometimes it's asked of people, how long will you treat me this way? Sometimes it's of God. How long will you put up with this? How long will you do this? How long will this go on? Waiting is hard. Waiting's hard. And when you have to wait through dark places and through dark times, it's not easy. The story begins with the verse 4 I read earlier, that Joseph took care of the butler and the baker, and that they were in confinement for some time. And then the dreams come, and Joseph interprets them, and within a week, Within 3 days, they're out of prison, and one's executed and one's alive. And then 2 more years. And you stop and think. I don't know how long it was that they were the sum time that Joseph took care of them, but they had been in prison together for a time. And Joseph has one plea, verse 14. Keep me in mind when it goes well with you. Please do me a kindness. By mentioning me to Pharaoh, get me out of this house. And he has to wait through the being forgotten. Luke 19, verse 13, Jesus tells a parable, and the point of the parable given to us in verse 13 is that that the servants in the parable are supposed to occupy until he comes. That's the King James. Occupy until I come. The word occupy means do your duty. It means be faithful in the work that I've given you to do. It means stay active, stay busy. In other words, waiting for us as Christians is not something that's passive. When we wait actively. We wait actively. It's why these things in the Psalms are set together. Why how long, O Lord, is present along with the psalmist David saying to himself, hope in God. Because if you just sit there like, I'm going to wait. How many of you have felt dejection set in if you don't actively choose to hope in God? Like, I have to hope in God. I have to set my hope in God. You and I are called to be active in the meantime. In Joseph's parable, in Joseph's story, it's that he's in charge of the prison, and as long as he's there, he's got work to do. And so he's going to continue to do it. He's going to keep doing it faithfully. He's going to keep doing it faithfully. If other people don't live up to their end of the bargain, he's going to keep doing it faithfully until God moves on his behalf, until something happens. I'm going to say it again. It's one of the hardest things in the world to do. It's one of the hardest things in the world. Listen, we get our eyes off of what God has called us to do. We get them on the failures of people around us. That lousy, no good cupbearer, he's forgotten. No, I'm going to serve where God has put me until God gets me out of this place. Right? He actively waits, not passively waits. The last thing that we see in this story is this problem of being alone. Genesis chapter 40, verse 23 tells us that the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. He forgot him. He forgets Joseph, leaves him in prison alone. Joseph, please notice this. Please notice this. When Joseph is left alone in prison, it's not because he's chosen isolation. It's because he's abandoned. It's because he's abandoned. Now listen, I don't know how to say this well. And at the end of the day, you're gonna have to test my motive. Well, it's not really your job to test my motives, but you're welcome to. We don't take life group attendance. I get no bonuses for better life group attendances. There's nothing like that, okay? The Assemblies of God doesn't give me a pat on the back for life group attendance. There's nothing, okay? But you know, I hear over and over again how much people feel the need for fellowship. And I hear over and over again how difficult fellowship is to do. And I just want to, it is not convenient. It's not convenient. I wish I could make it convenient. It's not convenient. All right. before I close. Quick story. I grew up in a school run by Baptist missionaries. We went on a beginning of the year retreat. This place, all of us missionary kids are there, and we're sitting there, and they had a speaker come, and he's speaking to us. And he told us, he said, my theme for the week of camp is priorities. And it was like the inside of me died. It just died. I was like, I am going to spend a week, every devotion, every service I go to, if it's about priorities, is just going to be telling me how I'm doing everything wrong. And it wasn't until years later I ran across that analogy of spinning plates. Anybody know what that's like? When your Christian life is like spinning plates? Well, here's my devotions. I got to spin the plate, and I got to pray, and I got to spin. And I'm supposed to sing too, so let's spin that plate. And I need some time with my wife, so I got to spin that plate. And I'm supposed to be volunteering at church. Let's spin that plate. Oh, this plate's slowing down. Better speed this plate up. And your whole life is like trying to keep the plates on the sticks. Because if you don't, it's going to come crashing down to the ground and fall to pieces. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, some plates you don't get to choose. Some plates are on sticks in your life, and you've got to keep them spinning. Welcome to the world. It's what it is. But we've got some plates that we've chosen. And all I'm saying this morning is choose some fellowship. It's an important plate. It's an important plate. Like, there are other plates that are less important than that one. There really are. A little fellowship is a good thing. Let me say it another way. Isolation is really bad for us. It's really bad for us. It's not healthy for our souls. We do need one another. Joseph is not in prison alone because he wants to be in prison alone. And that's the way, like, every once in a while I just get this picture in my head. Like, some of us are just in this little lonely prison all by ourselves. And unfortunately, it's a prison of our own making. We stepped in, we shut the door, and we closed everybody off. Open the door. Right? We need a little fellowship. We need a little fellowship. If you're interested in starting a life group, see Trevor. My advertisement. I'll do that one a little bit better next week. This is truly a burden on my heart for all of us. It's just that we do need, and by the way, it's not just that you need fellowship. Believe it or not, someone else needs your fellowship. Someone needs your fellowship. There's a friend that whenever I see him, he will almost always either say when I leave or text me, "Thank you for your company. Thank you for your company." It just, for me, it's become a good way of thinking. Like, whatever else I did, I kept somebody company. And they needed my company. That's a good thing. They weren't alone for a while. All right. For Joseph, it was worse than simply being alone. He was abandoned. He was left behind. He was forgotten by the cupbearer while he's in prison unjustly. It's 2 Timothy 4:16 and 17. It's the Apostle Paul saying, when I had to stand at my first trial, no man stood with me. Everyone forsook me. Everyone forsook me. I don't know how that sounds to you, but the word forsaken is an awful word. It's an awful word, right? My God, why hast thou forsaken me? We sing it, I'm forgiven because you were forsaken, I'm accepted, you were condemned. Right? This idea that Jesus took for us what he didn't want us to have to carry on our own. Right? That one of the things that Scripture reveals to us is that the kind of God he is the God who finds pleasure in putting lonely people into families. It's part of what he does. He sets the lonely in families, it says. Or it says it another way. If my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up. In other words, that God has a vested interest in lonely people. Now, it doesn't change the fact that sometimes we have to go through seasons of human loneliness. Paul went through it. Joseph went through it. Being abandoned, being left alone, being forgotten. Listen to this. The amazing thing about it is that both Joseph and Paul endured it with grace. Paul says, they all forsook me. And then he says this, may the Lord not charge it against them. May the Lord not hold it against them. I was forsaken. In other words, Father, forgive them. Right? Forgive them. He doesn't hold it against them. He speaks with grace. And the second thing is equally important. In fact, it might be, well, to me, the first one, the grace thing, is necessary for the second one to happen. And that is that both of these men discover God in their times of aloneness. Right? Everyone forsook me, but the Lord stood with me. But the Lord stood with me, Paul says. In other words, when I have to be alone, not because I choose to, but when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death all alone, thou art with me. And man, there are just things that we discover about God when we are truly, deeply, awfully alone that are just part of it. Now, let me say it again. Don't be there. Don't put God to the test. Don't presume. Don't put yourself there and expect God to show up. But if God asks you to walk through a time of abandonment and aloneness, he will show up for you. He will reveal himself to you. He will be present with you. When choice was available, Joseph chose to befriend the butler and the baker so that neither he nor they were alone. I have appreciated Brother Darren and his fellowship because he reminds me, he introduced me to the phrase social isolation, and he uses it all the time. And it's just helped me to remember that the world is full of lonely people. The world's full of lonely people. You know, I didn't ask him for permission, so I hope this is okay. I'm giving him credit where credit is due, so it was his way of saying it to me. But you know, most things that we have need of, there is some way of providing it, right? We have food pantries, we have places that give away clothes, we have lots of things like that. There's not a whole lot of programs for lonely people. There's a lot of people sitting in houses alone. That just are dying for company. Dying for company. Right? Just alone. You know, I think he may have been right when he said that's the space that's left to the church. Like in a world full of spaces that people have moved into, I'll take care of this problem, I'll work on this problem, I'll work on that problem. The one that's left for the church to do something about is people are lonely, right? People need company. It's something to think about. And at the very least, we should be able to practice among ourselves, right? There shouldn't be any lonely people in this fellowship. There should not be any lonely people in this fellowship. If there are, well, I hope it's by choice. I don't hope that you make that choice, but I hope no one's lonely that's starving for company that doesn't have company because no one wants to keep their company, right? In other words, we all need somebody, and there needs to be somebody for everybody. We all need some company. And I pray that we'll take that to heart. It wasn't why I preached this sermon. It was in the text, but it is fresh in my mind because it's something we've talked about a lot amongst the elders. These life groups have been something that I have felt like I have not done a good job of communicating how important we believe these are, how important it is how strongly we believe God has laid these on our hearts. So our encouragement to you is to find fellowship, and carve out time for it. Make time for it, even if you have to give something else up. Make some time for fellowship. All right, let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you again for Joseph's story in such detail and for giving us his example. He went through the fire in a lot of ways and was found faithful, Lord, ministering to people even in the midst of his own suffering, willing to share his own suffering with others. Please get me out of this place. I don't deserve to be here. I'm here unjustly. I was kidnapped. And he shares his story. He shares his hurt. Lord, I pray that you would help us to be people that are willing to pry open the doors of our hearts a little bit and to be able to share with one another and to let others share with us. And in that process of little bits of sharing, feeling comfortable, opening up a little bit more, Lord, I just pray that we would truly be a source of fellowship for people in a cold world that doesn't have a lot of true intimacy in it. I pray that we would be able to be a people that provide friendship for those who really want it. Lord, give us hearts for the kinds of didn't even like the way that was going to come out of my mouth. Forgive us for the ways that the eyes that we tend to have when we see people. Lord, deliver us from preconceptions, from seeing people through lenses that are not yours. Instead, help us to see people through your eyes. People that you love, that you died for, that are made in your image. And help us to love them enough to be willing to extend ourselves. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Check that out. Have a great Sunday.